What this reveals is simple. External comparison breeds either resentment or arrogance. Resentment when we fall short, arrogance when we come out ahead, and neither of those emotions leads to clarity, focus, or truth. Instead, they distort your perception of your own journey. They make you chase validation, not value, approval, not authenticity. And the more you chase what lies outside of you, the more disconnected you become from what lies within you. There's a better path. Compete with who you were yesterday, not because it's easier, but because it's more honest. When you become your own standard, everything changes. You know your battles, you know what you've overcome. Maybe someone else is lifting heavier weights at the gym, but they didn't grow up with your injuries. Maybe someone else is more financially successful, but they didn't start from where you did. When you compete with yourself, you build from a foundation rooted in your reality, not someone else's. And here's the most important point. Internal competition is sustainable. It's not a sprint against the world. It's a marathon toward mastery. You improve steadily with integrity. Your growth is measurable, but not dependent on external recognition. You wake up each day asking, how can I be 1% better? That's not a cliche, it's a philosophy. It's a lens that filters out distraction, noise, and ego. And it's incredibly powerful because it's actionable. You don't need applause to get started. You just need honesty and discipline. So stop asking, am I better than them? And start asking, am I better than who I was last week? That shift changes your entire psychological landscape. Because now you're not chasing a moving target, you're engaging with a consistent one, your own evolution. You're learning, refining, advancing, not to impress, but to become someone you respect. That's how you build a life you can stand behind. Not through comparison, through commitment, through courage, through self-directed growth. Competing with yourself is not only a more honest form of growth, but it's also the most sustainable path to personal development. When you base your progress on personal benchmarks instead of the standards set by others, you begin to build a life that's structured around depth rather than appearance. The problem with using others as a metric is that it leaves you perpetually exposed to instability. Their progress, their image, their performance, all of it is outside your control. But your own movement, your own trajectory, your effort, that's something you can actually work with. And that's where the real power lies. We live in a world that rewards results often instantly and loudly. We see people announce achievements on social media or receive public accolades, and it's tempting to want to measure up to those visible milestones. But the truth is that lasting success, the kind that doesn't crumble under pressure, is never built on comparison. It's built on quiet, internal, disciplined self-evaluation. It's built on asking, what can I do today that's a little better than what I did yesterday? And then doing it. That's the grind that leads to sustainable growth. Not flashy leaps, but consistent steps. When you adopt the mindset of self-competition, something powerful begins to shift in you. You become less interested in appearing successful and more interested in becoming competent. You stop chasing speed and start aiming for stability. You become more focused on refining your processes than chasing outcomes. And ironically, that internal focus often leads to greater external results. Because when you're not distracted by what others are doing, you can put all your energy into building something real, something grounded in self-awareness and resilience. People often underestimate how motivating it can be to watch yourself grow. Not in dramatic leaps, but in subtle, measurable ways. Maybe last week you couldn't focus for more than 20 minutes, and this week you hit 40. Maybe you used to skip workouts twice a week, and now you're only missing one. These changes may seem small, but over time, they become the foundation of a life transformed. Because growth that comes from within is harder to break. It's internalized. It becomes part of your identity, not just your image. Another crucial aspect is that self-competition teaches you to respect effort. When you're only trying to beat others, you might cut corners, manipulate results, or fake success. But when you're trying to improve yourself, you start valuing the struggle. You begin to appreciate the days you showed up even when you didn't feel like it. The times you didn't give up even when progress was invisible. That's when growth becomes sustainable. When it's fueled not by comparison, but by commitment. And perhaps most importantly, competing with yourself allows room for failure. If you're measuring success by whether you're better than you were yesterday, and today you stumble, It doesn't destroy you. You can regroup, reflect, and try again. Because you're not trying to outrun the world. You're trying to understand and improve your own pace. That mindset reduces shame and increases resilience. You learn to see setbacks not as proof of inadequacy, but as opportunities to refine your path. In the end, the pursuit of sustainable growth isn't about racing to a finish line. It's about becoming someone you're proud of. It's about taking full responsibility for your development and recognizing that the only meaningful competition is the one that happens between who you are and who you could be. That kind of growth isn't fast, but it's real, and it lasts. The idea of daily incremental improvement may seem too simple to be powerful, but that's exactly where its strength lies. The truth is, people often overestimate what they can do in a day and underestimate what they can achieve in a year by being consistent. We are taught to glorify the big breakthrough, the overnight success, the dramatic transformation. But behind every one of those stories is a long trail of quiet, consistent effort. If you aim to be just a little better than you were yesterday, and you repeat that process relentlessly, the compound effect of those improvements becomes undeniable. One of the reasons this concept matters so much is because it bypasses the paralyzing pressure of perfection. You don't need to be 10 steps ahead today, you just need to take one honest step forward. That's a goal that's realistic, manageable, and most importantly, repeatable. When you tell yourself, I just need to improve by 1% today, you shift your mindset from overwhelm to action. Suddenly, progress becomes accessible. You don't need to change your entire life at once. You need to change one habit, one thought, one behavior. This philosophy also encourages self-reflection. To get better than yesterday, you have to understand what yesterday actually looked like. What did you do well? Where did you fall short? What distracted you and what helped you focus? That kind of analysis is where growth begins. It teaches you to pay attention to your patterns, to learn from them, and to apply those lessons forward. It turns life into an ongoing experiment where you're the subject and the scientist at once. Small improvements also build momentum. Let's say you commit to waking up 15 minutes earlier each day. At first, it feels like nothing. But soon you're reading more, getting tasks done ahead of time, feeling less rushed. That tiny decision starts a chain reaction. When you see that change is possible, even on a small scale, you start to believe in your capacity to change more. Confidence grows. Discipline strengthens. And you become more resilient because your self-worth is now tied to your own measurable effort, not unpredictable results. Another key reason why incremental improvement works is because it creates space for failure without destroying the whole process. If you miss a day or slip back into an old habit, the damage is minimal. You haven't risked everything on one big leap. You can recalibrate and get back on track. This creates a system of growth that is flexible, forgiving, and adaptable, much more aligned with how real human change actually works. And here's the deeper insight. It's not really about the 1% improvement itself. It's about who you become in the process of seeking it. You become someone who observes, who reflects, who adapts. Someone who doesn't wait for perfect conditions to act. Someone who doesn't get thrown off by comparison or discouraged by setbacks. You become someone who moves forward, always. Over time, this incremental mindset reshapes your identity. You stop identifying as someone trying to improve and start identifying as someone who improves. That subtle but profound shift changes everything. Because once self-growth becomes part of how you see yourself, it no longer requires external motivation. It becomes intrinsic. It becomes who you are. And when you reach that point, improvement is no longer a task. It's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. One that brings depth, clarity, and purpose to your everyday actions. No one knows your struggles better than you do. This simple fact is often overlooked, yet it carries immense power. People around you can observe your behavior, see your successes, and even judge your failures, but they will never fully understand the internal battles you fight daily. They don't hear the critical voice in your head. They don't feel the weight of your past, the uncertainty of your future, or the complexity of the circumstances you're navigating. And because of that, comparing yourself to others becomes not only unhelpful, it becomes dishonest. You're working with a completely different story, and pretending it's the same as someone else's just distorts your reality. You've lived every moment of your life. You've seen the setbacks that no one else noticed. You've carried burdens silently. You've made sacrifices that were never acknowledged. Awesome. That history matters not because it defines your limits, but because it defines your depth. When you compete with yourself instead of with others, you honor that complexity. You say, I know where I started. I know what I've overcome. And I know what it costs me to keep showing up. That mindset isn't about pity. It's about precision. It's about understanding that your context is unique and that your growth must be evaluated within that context. When you truly begin to respect your own story, something shifts. You stop needing to justify your pace to others. You stop feeling ashamed of your progress just because it doesn't look like someone else's. You become more compassionate with yourself, not in a way that excuses laziness, but in a way that fosters resilience. You learn to ask better questions. What is realistically possible for me right now? Or what am I doing today that I couldn't have handled 6 months ago? Or where am I still holding back and why? These are the questions that produce growth rooted in awareness, not illusion. Knowing your own struggle also teaches you the difference between excuses and limitations. Excuses are what we tell ourselves to avoid responsibility. Limitations are real injuries, financial constraints, mental health challenges, family obligations. When you know yourself, you can distinguish between the two. You can be honest about what's holding you back and start working on what's actually within your control. That's where maturity comes in, not just trying harder, but trying smarter. Working around the obstacles instead of pretending they don't exist. It's easy to look at someone else's life and assume they've had it easier, or that they're more talented, more disciplined, more blessed, but you don't see what they've endured, just as they don't see what you've endured. That's why self-competition is so crucial. It levels the playing field. It puts the focus back where it belongs, on your own path, on your own improvement, on what you can do today with the tools and energy you have, not the tools you wish you had. There's also power in recognizing how far you've already come. You might still feel far from your goals, but think back. Are you the same person you were 5 years ago, 2 years ago, even 6 months ago? Chances are you've made changes. Maybe quiet ones, but real ones. That progress might not be dramatic or visible to others, but it's yours. And it matters. In the end, the only fair standard to measure yourself against is the person you were yesterday. That's a competition based on truth. It accounts for your pain, your progress, your potential. It doesn't ignore your weaknesses, but it doesn't magnify them either. It's grounded in reality. And growth grounded in reality is always more sustainable, more fulfilling, and more meaningful. You don't need to prove yourself to the world. You just need to prove to yourself that you're willing to keep going. That's enough. That's everything. Taking personal responsibility for your growth is one of the most transformative decisions you can make. It's the point where you stop waiting for ideal circumstances, stop blaming the environment, and stop outsourcing your progress to other people's approval. Instead, you begin to realize that the direction of your life is primarily determined by the small, consistent actions you choose to take, actions that you control. When you compete with yourself, you accept that growth is your job, not the world's obligation to hand you. And that shift in mindset from external blame to internal responsibility is where real change begins. There's a kind of power that comes with saying, "This is on me." It might feel intimidating at first because it removes your excuses, but it also places the tools for progress back in your hands. You don't have to wait for anyone else to change. You don't have to beg for better circumstances. You simply begin with where you are and move forward with what you have. That's a humbling process, but also a deeply empowering one. Because once you realize you are the primary author of your life's trajectory, you stop being passive and start becoming deliberate. Personal responsibility doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything that's gone wrong. That's a misunderstanding. You are not responsible for the cards you were dealt, but you are responsible for how you play them. You are not responsible for your childhood, but you are responsible for how you choose to heal, respond, and grow from it. That's not a burden, it's a privilege. Because in owning your development, you reclaim your freedom. You no longer depend on validation, permission, or ideal timing. You just begin. And once you adopt that mindset, life stops being something that happens to you. It becomes something you actively shape. You stop asking questions like, why does this keep happening to me? And start asking, what patterns am I reinforcing? You look at your habits, your choices, your routines, and you evaluate them honestly. You start seeing obstacles as feedback rather than defeat. And you become more emotionally durable, more focused, and more grounded. This responsibility-centered approach also fosters a kind of quiet confidence. Because you know that even if today wasn't perfect, you're the kind of person who keeps trying. You don't need applause for that. You don't need an audience. You just need to look in the mirror and know you're doing the work. That's where self-respect comes from, not from image, but from integrity. Not from perfection, but from persistence. Competing with yourself reinforces that sense of ownership. You no longer measure yourself by someone else's timeline or someone else's idea of success. You define your own progress. You set your own goals. You become responsible not just for your actions, but for your reactions, your mindset, your discipline. That kind of responsibility creates freedom. You are no longer a slave to comparison or resentment. You are anchored in your own lane, focused on your own evolution. It's easy to blame the system, your upbringing, the economy, the people around you. And sometimes those things genuinely do make life harder. But if you stay stuck in blame, you also stay stuck in powerlessness. Responsibility is not about ignoring difficulty. It's about taking initiative in spite of it. It's about asking, what can I do next, given the reality I'm in? Not what should have happened, not what would be fair, but what is possible. At the end of the day, no one is coming to do it for you. And that's not meant to discourage you. That's meant to remind you that you're capable. Because once you decide that your life is yours to build, you stop drifting. You start choosing. You start leading. And you begin to move, not perfectly, not always quickly, but always forward. That's what personal responsibility looks like. And that's what true growth requires. The goal of self-competition is not to become perfect. It is to become better. Perfection is a myth, an illusion that traps people in cycles of paralysis and self-doubt. It tells you that unless you can do something flawlessly, you shouldn't try at all. But self-competition pushes against that narrative. It reminds you that growth doesn't require perfection. It requires direction. The real question is not, am I perfect yet, but am I improving? That mindset shifts the entire framework of how you approach your goals, your challenges, and even your failures. When you aim to be better, you accept that you're a work in progress. You stop expecting flawlessness and start pursuing refinement. You develop patience with yourself, but not complacency. You become more focused on effort and consistency than instant results. That kind of mentality is far more sustainable in the long run because it recognizes that the road to mastery is messy, non-linear, and deeply human. No one wakes up excellent. Excellence is built one flawed but intentional day at a time. Competing with yourself allows you to measure progress in terms that are honest and personal. You're not comparing your day 1 to someone else's year 10. You're comparing your current level of understanding, effort, or discipline to your past selves. That form of measurement leads to authentic pride, not arrogance, but a quiet sense of earned confidence. Because you know you didn't cheat the process, you didn't fake the outcome, you grew through real struggle, and you're still growing. Chasing perfection often leads to burnout. You become so obsessed with getting everything right that you begin avoiding anything that could expose your flaws. That avoidance stunts your growth. On the other hand, striving to be better invites experimentation. It gives you permission to fail, to adapt, and to try again. You stop needing everything to go right and start focusing on making it go forward. That's a deeper kind of wisdom, one that values resilience over image, process over polish. Striving for better also makes you more receptive to feedback. When you're not obsessed with looking perfect, you're more open to learning from critique, from experience, and even from failure. You're less fragile because your identity isn't tied to being flawless, it's tied to improving. That's when growth becomes exponential. Because every mistake becomes a lesson, not a threat. Every setback becomes a stepping stone, not a stopping point. This mindset extends to every area of life. Whether it's your health, your discipline, your relationships, your craft, you're not asking for overnight change. You're not pretending to have it all together. You're simply committed to doing better today than you did yesterday. And when that becomes your standard, your self-worth is no longer based on impossible ideals. It's grounded in effort, honesty, and a forward-moving trajectory. You become proud not of being perfect, but of staying in the fight, even when it's hard. Ultimately, choosing to be better rather than perfect makes you more durable, more focused, more alive, because you can finally breathe, you can finally act. You can finally risk failing because failure is no longer proof of inadequacy. It's just part of the learning curve. You stop living under the weight of unrealistic expectations and start living with the power of progress. That is the beauty of self-competition. It doesn't ask you to be the best. It asks you to be better, and that's a goal worth chasing. Because every time you become even slightly better than you were before, you're proving that growth is possible. And when growth is possible, everything is. And yeah,